the first thing Arbitrator Vasselin noticed was the temperature reading. Not an alarm, not a transmission, not even a distress signal from one of the border stations. Just a number printed in the corner of a routine stellar cartography update, so far outside the expected range that her secondary cognition processor flagged it as a sensor error before her primary mind had finished reading the line. 0.7 solar luminosity variance, localized, persistent, growing. In the Thoressi system, human space. She stared at the number for 11 seconds, an eternity for a species capable of processing 4 simultaneous information streams. And then she did something she had not done in 30 years of service to the Galactic Oversight Council. She checked it twice. The ban had been simple, unanimous, and absolute. The Stellar Forging Prohibition Act passed the Galactic Oversight Council by a margin of 41-0, with humanity's 2 provisional representatives abstaining. Not in protest, they had explained through their ambassador, but because they needed more time to understand the legislation. That had been 8 years ago. The council had found the abstention charming in the way one finds a child's misunderstanding of table manners charming. Humans needed more time to understand. Of course they did. They had been spacefaring for less than 2 centuries. They still had wars over land. They still kept animals as companions for emotional comfort. Their infrastructure was cobbled together from borrowed Keth technology and salvaged Myrindi survey vessels, and their single space station smelled, according to every alien diplomat who had ever visited, faintly of something called asterisk coffee asterisk, which was an addictive stimulant they consumed compulsively and apparently considered civilized. They abstained because they didn't understand. That had been the council's interpretation. Vasselin was beginning to wonder whether the humans had understood perfectly. She pulled the full stellar survey from the archive, 3 years of passive observation data from the automated beacon network that blanketed this region of the arm, and she began reading backward through time. The variance had not appeared suddenly, it had grown. Slowly, methodically, scaled in increments so gradual that each individual data point fell within the rounding error tolerance of the monitoring system. Whoever was doing this had known exactly how much change the automated sensors would flag as anomalous. They had stayed precisely beneath that threshold for, she ran the calculation, 26 months. Then 3 weeks ago, they had stopped hiding. "Counselor Draven," she said, opening the priority channel without preamble, "I need you to look at something." A pause, the wet, resonant click of Draven's secondary breathing aperture, the Keth equivalent of a surprised intake of breath. "Is this the Thoressi reading?" "You've seen it." "I saw it 40 minutes ago. I've been trying to decide how to classify it." "And..." Another pause, longer. "I'm going to need you to tell me I'm wrong, Vasselin. I very much need to be wrong about this." She looked again at the number in the corner of the screen. The temperature variance that should not exist. The luminosity shift that could only be produced by one class of technology. A class of technology that the Council had banned specifically because the last civilization to build one had accidentally destabilized their star's fusion equilibrium and reduced a system of 4 inhabited worlds to expanding plasma over the course of 19 days. "You're not wrong," she said. The silence on the channel lasted a very long time. The Council convened an emergency session within 6 hours, which was, by the standards of a governing body spanning 41 member species distributed across 900 light-years, essentially instantaneous. This was a measure of how seriously they took the stellar forging prohibition. Not because the technology was rare, 3 species had independently developed it. Not because it was difficult. The engineering principles, once understood, were elegant and achievable by any mid-tier industrial civilization. Because it was catastrophically, extinction-class dangerous. Not in theory, in practice. documented, on record, with before and after imagery that the Council showed to every new member species during orientation, specifically to communicate that this was not a restriction born of politics or fear of competition. It was a restriction born of 4 billion dead. The Myrindi representative, whose species had been the closest neighbors to the Korath system when it happened, had not spoken a single word during the emergency session. She sat at her station with her 6 eyes open, and her feeding tendrils held motionless against her thorax in the Myrindi gesture that translated, roughly, as I am experiencing something for which language has not prepared me. Ambassador Lena Vasquez, humanity's senior representative to the Council, sat in the provisional section, the section slightly removed from the main circle, the section with smaller chairs and fewer information feeds, the section that communicated through architecture alone that its occupants were guests rather than members. She had been notified of the session's purpose 20 minutes before it began. Vasquez had a particular face that Vasselin had catalogued over 3 years of diplomatic interaction. It was the face she wore when she was listening very carefully while working very hard to appear to be doing nothing at all. It was the human expression for I am buying time. She was wearing it now. Ambassador Vasquez, the council chair, the ancient Salvath patriarch Urham Vas, turned his full attention to the provisional section. When Urham Vas turned his full attention towards something, you felt it the way you felt a change in atmospheric pressure. Are you aware of what your government has been constructing in the Thuresi system? Vasquez met his gaze. I would like to request clarification on what specific activities the Council believes are occurring in Thuresi before I respond. A stellar forge, Urham Vas said. We believe your government is constructing a stellar forge. Vasquez did not blink. Humans blinked constantly under normal circumstances. The Council had studied this, catalogued it, used it as a stress indicator during diplomatic negotiations. The fact that she did not blink now was noted by every alien mind in the chamber simultaneously. I'll need to contact my government for a full briefing on current Thuresi infrastructure projects, she said. You will contact them, Urham Vas said, and you will tell them that construction must halt immediately. You will tell them that council inspectors will arrive at Thuresi within 15 standard days. And you will tell them, he paused, and the pause had weight, that the council is prepared to be understanding, given humanity's relative inexperience with galactic law, provided full compliance is immediate and complete. Vasquez nodded slowly. I'll convey that message. She said nothing else. She did not say, yes, we'll stop. She did not say, I'm sure this is a misunderstanding. She said she would convey the message. Vasselin noticed. She suspected she was the only one who did. The inspectors arrived at Thuresi in 14 days. The council had dispatched a full verification team, 7 specialists, 2 Keth engineers with direct experience in stellar mechanics, 3 Myrindi sensor technicians whose instruments could detect gravitational harmonics at a resolution no human technology could approach, and Vasselin herself as arbitrator, because the council had decided this required someone who had spent time in human space and understood, to whatever degree any non-human could, how they thought. The Thuresi system contained 1 inhabited world, 1 station, 2 automated mining operations, and according to every scan taken during the 14-day approach, nothing unusual. I'm reading standard fusion signatures from the mining operations, the lead Keth engineer said, reviewing the approach data. Background stellar radiation is within normal parameters. Luminosity is, a pause, normal. Vasselin checked the figure herself. The variance was gone. Not reduced, not declining, gone, as if it had never existed. They stopped it, said one of the sensor technicians. No, Vasselin was still looking at the data. This is wrong. A stellar forge operating at the intensity our sensors recorded 20 days ago cannot simply stop. The thermal inertia alone would take months to dissipate. This is an error, the engineer offered. She looked out at the star. The Ressi sun hung in the viewport, orange-white and serene, utterly ordinary. She looked at it for a long time. "Bring us in," she said. "I want to speak to their station commander directly." The human station was called *Threshold*. It was, by galactic infrastructure standards, embarrassingly modest, a cylindrical structure roughly 2 kilometers in length, clearly constructed in sections over a period of years, with additions and modifications visibly bolted to earlier sections in a way that suggested the builders had been improvising the design as they went. The Keth engineers said nothing, but their body language communicated volumes. The station commander met them at the docking bay. Her name was Commander Yale Dror, a compact woman with close-cropped gray hair and the particular stillness that Vasilin had learned to associate with military training. Not the stillness of calm, but the stillness of something held in reserve. "Arbitrator," Dror said, shaking her hand in the human fashion. "Welcome to Threshold. We've prepared full access to our facility logs as requested, if your team would like to begin the inspection." "Commander," Vasilin did not accept the deflection. "Our long-range sensors recorded a sustained luminosity variance in your star 23 days ago. The readings indicated active stellar forging class energy manipulation. I'd like your explanation before we begin any inspection." Dror met her eyes. "Our scientists identified an anomalous resonance pattern in Theresi's magnetic field 26 months ago. We've been running a long-term monitoring and stabilization project. The energy readings your sensors detected were a byproduct of the stabilization arrays." Vasilin waited. "Stabilization arrays," she repeated. "Yes, which have now been deactivated. The anomaly resolved. The arrays are in standby." The words were technically complete answers to each question she had asked. They contained nothing false that she could immediately demonstrate. They were also, in the way that completely true statements can sometimes function, entirely a form of misdirection. She looked at Commander Dror. Commander Dror looked back at her with the same measured stillness. "I would like," Vasilin said carefully, "to speak privately, just you and I." They sat in Dror's office with the door closed. The room smelled of the coffee, that omnipresent human thing, dark and bitter and apparently necessary. A photograph on the desk showed Dror standing with 2 younger humans in front of a body of water. Family, Vasilin had learned. Humans kept pictures of their family at their workplace, close enough to see throughout the day, as though they needed the reminder that the people they worked for were specific and real and near. "Let me ask you something," Vasilin said. "Not as an arbitrator, as someone who has spent 3 years trying to understand your species. The variance we detected, the scaling, the deliberate increment control, the threshold management that was engineered. Someone knew exactly what our sensors would flag." Dror said nothing. "And yet 3 weeks ago, whoever was doing this stopped hiding. The readings spiked. They practically announced themselves." She leaned forward slightly. "That troubles me more than the construction itself, because it implies a decision. Someone decided to let us see. I need to understand why." Dror was quiet for a moment. She looked at the photograph on her desk. Then she said, "How much do you know about what's happening on the outer rim?" The question landed in Vasilin's mind like something dropped from height. "That's not an answer to mine." "It is," Dror said. "It's the only answer that matters, so I'm asking, how much does the Council actually know about what's moving through the outer rim systems?" Vasilin knew about the Dreth migration. The Council had classified reports, sensor anomalies, displaced settlements on 3 fringe worlds, a Solvith survey vessel that had gone silent 8 months ago and been quietly written off as equipment failure. She knew the way one knows something that one's institution has collectively decided not to fully examine. She looked at Commander Dror. "Tell me what you know." "The Dreth aren't migrating," Dror said. "They were pushed. Something drove them out of the void sectors. Something that's been moving inward for approximately 4 years at a rate that puts it at the outer council boundary in." She paused. "Our projections say 14 months. Optimistic projection, 18. Vaseline felt something shift in the architecture of her understanding. The Council's models. The Council's models use sensor networks that weren't designed to track what this thing is. Dror's voice was level, informational, stripped of drama in a way that made it more frightening, not less. "We know because we had a ship out there. We sent it specifically because we were worried about the discrepancy between official council data and what our outer colonies were reporting. And the ship came back, which is more than I can say for the Solveth survey vessel." She held Vaseline's gaze, but only barely, and only because the crew made a decision that the council's rules of engagement would have explicitly prohibited. The room was very quiet. "The Stellar Forging Project," Vaseline said slowly. "You're not building a weapon. We're not building anything the Council has conceptual language for yet," Dror said. "Which is why I wanted you to come here before the full Council makes a decision based on incomplete information. Again." The word "again" hung in the air between them. Vaseline thought about the Stellar Forging prohibition, the 41-0 vote, the imagery of the Korath system, the 4 billion dead, used as a pedagogical tool to communicate the importance of following the rules. She thought about humanity's 2 representatives abstaining, because they needed more time to understand the legislation. She thought about 26 months of data hidden inside sensor tolerances. "Show me," she said. What Commander Dror showed her was not in the station's official inspection logs, which was the first thing Vaseline noted. The second thing she noted was the depth of the facility. Threshold was 2 kilometers in length on the outside. The actual inhabited and operational sections extended another 3 kilometers inward through the asteroid it had been built into, carved into the rock over what must have been years, invisible to any external scan, because the rock itself absorbed and scattered the energy signatures. The humans had built the actual station inside the station. The Keth engineers back in the inspection bay with access to the official logs were seeing, she realized, exactly what they were meant to see. The chamber at the end of the carved tunnel was large enough that her first instinct was that she had miscalculated the scale. It was roughly spherical, perhaps 200 meters across, and it was full of structures she could not immediately classify, not because they were alien, but because they were hybrid asterisk. Human construction philosophy grafted onto frameworks that were clearly derived from Keth schematics, but modified, adapted, pushed into configurations the Keth would never have arrived at because the modifications violated 3 principles of standard stellar engineering that the Keth treated as inviolable. The humans had treated them as starting points. "What are you looking at?" she asked. Dror said, "The reason we stopped hiding. We hit a threshold in the construction sequence that required full power activation to proceed. There was no way to do it quietly. So we had a choice, stop permanently, or finish the sequence and deal with the council when they arrived. And you chose to finish." "We chose to finish. No apology in it, no defiance either, just the flat, declarative statement of a decision already made and owned completely. Even knowing, Dror said, that the thing moving through the outer rim doesn't care about the Stellar Forging Prohibition Act, doesn't sit on the council, didn't vote 41-0 for anything, and will reach your core systems in 14 months regardless of whether we follow the rules." Vaseline stood in the middle of the chamber and looked at the hybrid structures and thought about the 4 billion dead in the Korath system, and thought about 41 civilizations in a room deciding the rules by which the galaxy would operate. and thought about two human representatives sitting in slightly smaller chairs who had said they needed more time to understand. "What does it do?" she asked. "The device, if it's complete, what does it actually do?" Dror was quiet for a moment. She looked at the same structures Vasilin was looking at, and something in her face changed, not softened exactly, but became briefly visible in a way it had not been before. "It doesn't destabilize a star," she said. "We read the Korath reports. Every single one. For 2 years before we started designing this, a team of 40 people did nothing but read the Korath reports and figure out what went wrong." She paused. The Korath civilization knew they were doing something dangerous, and they did it anyway because they thought the payoff was worth the risk. They were wrong about the risk. "And you're not. We're not planning the same thing they were planning." Dror turned to face her fully. "A stellar forge, the way the Council defines it, uses the star as a fuel source. You tap the fusion process, you extract energy, you scale it up. You destabilize the star in the process, and if you do it wrong or even right at certain scales, you get Korath. That is precisely why the ban." "We're not doing that," Dror said. "We're not extracting, we're reflecting. Specifically calibrated gravitational lensing arrays positioned at exact resonance points in the star's magnetic field. No energy extraction, no fusion interference. We're using the star as an asterisk mirror." Vasilin stared at her. "A mirror," she said. "For what's coming through the outer rim," Dror said. "Because the data we have from our ship suggests that what's out there navigates by stellar radiation mapping. It follows starlight. It has been following starlight inward through the void sectors for approximately 60 years. She paused. "We can redirect it, not destroy it, not stop it, redirect it. Turn a star into a lens that bends its navigational signal and sends it on a trajectory that curves back out into the void." The silence in the chamber was complete. Vasilin's mind was running the implications in overlapping threads, faster than she usually allowed herself to think in front of others, because the implications were. "That would work," she said. It came out before she could stop it. She was not a stellar engineer, but she was a highly trained analytical mind, and the logic was that would actually work. "Yes," Dror said, "we know. But the energy requirements." She turned and looked again at the hybrid structures, recalibrating her interpretation of them now that she knew what they were for. To create a gravitational lens at that scale, you'd need to sustain. She stopped. "About 0.7 solar luminosity equivalent in directed output," Dror said quietly, "for approximately 72 hours. The number from the sensor report, the number that had started everything." "You've already run it," Vasilin said. "We ran a full-scale test 3 weeks ago." Dror paused. "It worked." Vasilin found that she needed to sit down. There was a human chair nearby, too small, proportioned wrong, and she sat in it anyway. "You built a prohibited technology," she said, working through it aloud, "that technically violates the letter of the stellar forging ban, in order to demonstrate a proof of concept for a defensive application that no one on the Council knew to request, in preparation for a threat that the Council's models haven't properly characterized, using a method that the Council's engineers would likely have dismissed as theoretical. We built it in 22 months, Dror said, with what we had. The addition was not boastful, it was informational, but it landed with weight regardless. The survey ship you sent to the outer rim, Vasilin said. The one that came back, I want to see the data. You will, Dror was quiet for a moment. But I need you to understand something first. Before you see the data, I need you to understand why we didn't bring this to the Council through official channels. Because the Council would have taken months to convene, debate, and commission an independent study, Vasilin said. Yes. And because the application technically falls within the prohibited category, even if the mechanism is fundamentally different. Yes. And because, Vasilin said slowly, You were not certain the Council would act in time even if they believed you. Because the Council moves at the pace of consensus, and 41 species reaching consensus on a threat their models haven't confirmed. Would take longer than 14 months, Dror said. The chair was too small, and the room smelled of carved rock and human machinery, and the distant ghost of coffee. And somewhere behind them, 3 kilometers away, Keth engineers were reviewing pristine falsified logs, and the alien minds of the Council were waiting for Vasilen's preliminary report. And the star outside the viewport was ordinary and calm, and already secretly, invisibly capable of something the Council had decided 8 years ago was not allowed. How many people know about this? She asked. Everyone on this station, approximately 260 people. Dror paused, and the government officials who approved the project. Your government approved this? Yes. Knowing the Council's position? Yes. Vasilen looked at her, and they were willing to accept the diplomatic consequences. They were willing, Dror said, to accept whatever came after if the alternative was the outer rim situation reaching the Council's core systems, while everyone was still debating whether the sensor data was reliable. She thought about Ambassador Vasquez in the Council chamber saying she would convey the message, not agreeing, not promising, conveying. Buying time. Not because humans didn't understand the legislation. Because they had understood it perfectly, understood its implications and its limitations, and had made a decision that no Council member species would have made, not because they lacked the courage, but because no Council member species thought the way humans thought, weighted risk the way humans weighted it, assigned values the way humans assigned them. No Council member species had the particular combination of awareness of their own mortality and willingness to proceed anyway. Show me the survey ship data, Vasilen said, all of it. The data took 4 hours to review. She reviewed it with her full cognitive capacity running, no background processing. Every analytical thread focused on the information coming from the human research vessel *Yos. 12 crew, a converted mining ship, sent into the void sectors with sensors that the Keth engineers in the inspection bay would have called inadequate for deep void survey work. The humans had modified the sensors. Of course they had. They had replaced the Keth design detection arrays with something cobbled together from 3 different sensor philosophies, something that no certified engineer of any Council species would have signed off on because it violated multiple calibration standards, and something that had detected, with remarkable clarity, what the standard network had missed. The thing in the void was not a ship. It was not a fleet. The human crew had debated terminology in their logs. She could see the debate in the notation timestamps, people arguing in the margins of scientific records, the way humans apparently argued everywhere, and had settled on the word *migration before crossing it out and writing *propagation, and then crossing that out too. The word they ultimately used was the one they always seemed to fall back on when existing language failed them. Thing. It was a thing approximately 70,000 kilometers across at its widest observed point. It had been traversing the void for a minimum of 60 years based on the trajectory data. It was not hostile in the way a fleet is hostile, did not have weapons in the way a warship has weapons, but 3 of the fringe worlds it had passed through were no longer inhabited, and the Dreth who had fled it were not fleeing violence. They were fleeing consumption. The thing ate starlight. It processed stellar radiation as fuel, navigated by it, was drawn toward it with an orientation so fundamental that redirecting the signal was not a workaround. It was the solution. The *Yos* crew had survived contact, barely, by the margins of barely that exist only in retrospect, only because everyone who lived can tell themselves the margin was always there, by doing something that the Council's rules of engagement explicitly prohibited. They had detonated their mining array at maximum yield while still within the thing's sensor range. In the middle of a scientific observation mission, they had functioned as a weapon. They drove it off, Vasilin said. Temporarily, Dror said, long enough to get clear. They had no authorization for a weapons deployment. No, Dror agreed. And the crew? They're here on the station, Dror paused, if you want to speak with them. She did. The *Yo's crew occupied the station's secondary crew quarters. They were 12 people in various states of recovery. She could see it in the particular stillness some of them carried, the way certain of them sat at angles to doorways. The habit of checking sightlines that combat-experienced soldiers of every species she had met shared. Trauma had a universal posture. Their mission commander was a young man named Reyes, younger than she had expected, which surprised her, though she was not sure why she'd expected age to correlate with the decisions he'd made. He stood when she entered and offered his hand and looked at her with the directness that she had come to understand was the human version of complete honesty. No signaling, no performance, just the fact of meeting her eyes. I understand you've reviewed our data, he said. I have. I have questions about your decision to deploy the mining array. I know, he said again, we violated protocol. You violated multiple protocols. You were on a scientific observation mission. You were not authorized for contact, for active sensor sweeps within 5,000 kilometers, and certainly not for weapons deployment. Yes, he said. She waited. We had a choice, he said, between the protocol and the crew. The thing, whatever it is, had oriented on us. It was tracking our energy signature. In approximately 4 minutes, it would have been close enough that departure would have been, he paused, difficult, so we made a choice. The protocol exists because unilateral contact with an unknown entity could precipitate. I know why the protocol exists, Reyes said quietly, not rudely, not dismissively, with the particular gentleness of someone who has already had every argument that's about to be made in their own head at 3 in the morning alone. I read the reasoning, I understood it, and then I made a different decision. He looked at her. Are any of my crew in legal jeopardy? He asked. It was not the first question she had expected. She had expected defensiveness, justification, an extension of the argument. Instead, the first thing he asked was whether his crew would face consequences. That's a matter for the council too. I want to know, he said, before I answer any more questions, whether my crew is protected. Because everything that happened was my decision, my order, and if there's disciplinary action, it should be mine. Exclusively. Vasilin looked at him for a long moment. Sit down, she said, though she was the one who had arrived. Tell me everything from the beginning, not the data, what you saw *. He talked for 2 hours. She had reviewed the *Yo's data, the sensor logs, the calibrated outputs and trajectory analyses, and all the careful language of the scientific record. She had not understood what it had actually been, until Reyes described watching the thing move through the void through a viewport, 12 humans in a converted mining ship, without any of the context or preparation that every council protocol required before any crew encountered something new. They had watched it process a small body, not a planet, not inhabited, but large, and they had watched it in real time. The crew packed into the observation deck because there was not space for 12 people in the viewport room, and they had crowded in anyway, because humans apparently could not be alone for events they felt should be witnessed together. We were quiet, Reyes said, completely quiet for about 20 minutes, which is, he glanced at Commander Dror briefly, who was standing near the door. That's not normal for us. No, Dror confirmed quietly, it isn't. And then Vasari, she's our sensor tech, she said, I need everyone out of this room. I need to concentrate. And she sat down at the console and she started running calculations for 6 hours without stopping. The trajectory projections, Vasilin said. She'd already started building the deviation model before we decided to leave, Reyes said. She was building a deflection solution for something we didn't yet know we were going to escape, just building it anyway because the problem was there. The room was quiet for a moment. We need 12 more stations, Dror said from the doorway. Vaseline looked at her. For the lensing array to work at scale, to deflect something that large, on a trajectory correction significant enough to redirect it back into the void, we need the same configuration deployed at 12 other stars along the projected approach corridor. The Thoressi test proved the concept. We can build the stations. She paused. But we can't build 12 stations in 14 months without help, without authorization, without resources that are currently controlled by Council member species. There it was. The complete shape of it. That's why you stopped hiding, Vaseline said. Not because you finished the test, because you needed us to see it. We needed the Council to have no choice but to engage with the reality, Dror said. We couldn't bring the data to the Council and watch it spend 6 months in committee. We needed to be caught. You got caught intentionally, Vaseline said. We made ourselves visible, Dror said. Yes. 26 months of careful threshold management. Then 3 weeks ago, a deliberate signal, not a failure of patience. A decision. A calculated abandonment of cover precisely timed to maximize the Council's position, close enough to the threat timeline that delay was impossible, far enough ahead that response was still viable. They had manipulated the Galactic Oversight Council into an emergency session. Using a prohibited technology that wasn't what it appeared to be. In response to a threat the Council hadn't fully characterized. To force a conversation that couldn't happen through official channels in the time available. How long, Vaseline asked, did it take you to plan that? Dror was quiet for a moment. About as long as it took us to build the station, she said. The Council's emergency session reconvened 7 days later. Vaseline delivered her report personally, which was unusual. Preliminary inspection findings were typically submitted in document form, with the arbitrator available for questions. She stood in the chamber and delivered it aloud because she needed to see their faces. She showed them the *Yo's* data. She showed them the trajectory models. She showed them the Thoressi test results. She did not, for almost 40 minutes, show them the inside of the hidden chamber in Threshold Station. She built toward it deliberately, the way the humans had built toward this moment, and when she finally displayed the images of the hybrid structures, human adaptations of Keth schematics pushed into configurations that violated 3 principles of standard stellar engineering. She watched the Keth engineers in the Council's technical advisory section look at the images with the particular expression that translated across every biological interface she had ever learned as, "That shouldn't work." And then they kept looking. And she watched the moment, visible on each of their faces, when they understood that it did. The Myrindi representative, who had not spoken during the first emergency session, raised one of her secondary limbs. In the Myrindi tradition, this indicated a formal request to address the Council on a matter of significant weight. She said, "I would like to know, when the human government approved this project, when they authorized the construction of a prohibited technology in deliberate violation of the ban, did they believe we would sanction them?" Vasquez, sitting in the provisional section with her same measured stillness, was the one who answered. "They believed," she said carefully, "that you would have to decide whether the letter of the prohibition or the survival of the core systems was the more pressing concern. They felt that faced with that choice, you would make the right decision." "That is a very generous assessment of this Council," the Myrindi representative said. "They're a generous species," Vasquez said, "when they trust people. And if the Council had decided to sanction them regardless, then they would have appealed and continued building." She paused. "The project was always going to be completed. The only question was whether it would be completed with the Council's help or without it. The chamber was not quiet. Every species communicated distress differently, and the chamber was full of distress, communicated in 41 different registers simultaneously. Urham Vass, the ancient Solvith patriarch, raised one hand, a gesture that produced silence because everything he did produced silence. He had been watching Vasquez for the last 40 minutes with an expression that Vasselin could not entirely read, which was itself unusual. "Ambassador," he said, "your species has been members of this council for 11 years. You have 2 provisional seats. You are not full members. You have no veto authority, no binding vote, no right to unilateral action within the arm." He paused. "You built an illegal facility, sent an unauthorized vessel into the void sectors, and manipulated this council into an emergency session using a prohibited technology as evidence." "Yes," Vasquez said. "And you did this," Urham Vass said, "because you decided it needed to be done." "Yes, on behalf of 41 species who did not ask for your help." The silence was different now, not distress, something else, something that moved through the chamber like a change in pressure. "Yes," Vasquez said quietly. Urham Vass was quiet for a long time. His species lived for centuries, and the weight of centuries was in the pause. "The construction of 12 additional lensing stations," he said at last, "will require an emergency authorization, a reinterpretation of the stellar forging prohibition as it applies to non-extractive configurations, a full council technical review of the *Yos* data, and the assignment of primary coordination authority to a member species technical team with Keth engineering leadership." "We understand," Vasquez said. "The humans will be subordinate to that coordination structure." "Of course. And their provisional representatives will formally request," he said, each word deliberate, "that this council accept a motion for expanded provisional authority, given the demonstrated capacity for," he paused, "strategic initiative." Vasquez allowed a pause of her own, just long enough. "We'd be honored to make that request," she said. The 12 stations were completed in 11 months and 3 weeks. Vasselin was present for the activation. She stood in the coordination center on Threshold Station next to Commander Dror and watched the cascade sequence begin station by station across 12 systems, the lensing arrays coming online at calibrated intervals, each one shifting the calculated output of a star by precisely enough to create, in composite, a signal redirection the scale of which had never been attempted. The thing in the void changed course 19 hours after full activation. It did not respond, did not fight, did not adapt. It simply followed the light, the way it had followed light for 60 years, and the light now led somewhere else. The trajectory calculation took the deflection and ran it forward in time and put its ultimate course bearing toward a region of sparse interstellar medium with a stellar density insufficient to sustain it. It was not a victory in any conventional sense. Nothing had been defeated. No battle had been won. The thing would simply go somewhere else and eventually, over time, dissipate. "Is that it?" one of the junior technicians asked. Dror looked at the display. At the shifting track, the gradually curving line of a vast and incomprehensible thing being redirected by careful mirrors. "That's it," she said. The technician seemed deflated. The shape of the moment didn't match what endings were supposed to feel like. Dror looked at Vasselin. Vasselin understood. She was thinking the same thing. There would be no ceremony adequate to the thing they had built toward. No images dramatic enough to communicate what had been accomplished here. No language that compressed 26 months of hidden construction and 11 months of emergency authorization. And the *Yos* crew's particular silence in front of a viewport into a form the history files would carry correctly. 12 stations, Vasselin said, built in 11 months. 12 stations, Dror agreed, with help. You lost 3 people, Vasselin said, in the construction phase. 2 in a pressure failure on one of the outer stations, 1 in a transit accident. She knew their names from the station records. She had read them. And the *Yo's crew has a member who will not return to Deep Void work. Yes, Dror said. The Council will officially categorize this as a successful emergency response. The reinterpretation of the prohibition will stand. The lensing stations will become part of the permanent monitoring network. She paused, and none of the records will accurately represent what actually happened. No, Dror said, they won't. They'll show a legal framework, a multi-species collaboration, a successful deflection. Vasselin looked at the display, at the curving line still slowly shifting. They won't show the 26 months, the threshold management, the decision to be caught. Records never show that part, Dror said simply. She was not bitter. She did not say it with resignation. She said it the way she said everything, as a statement of known fact, owned and filed, moving on. Vasselin thought about the stellar forging prohibition, about 41 votes, about the 4 billion dead in the Korath system, used for decades as evidence for why the rules must be followed absolutely. She thought about how the Korath had known they were doing something dangerous, and had done it anyway because they believed the payoff was worth the risk. She thought about how the humans had known the same thing, done the same calculation, and arrived at a completely different place. Not because they were better, not because they were stronger, not because their technology was superior or their judgment was certified, or their history was longer or their seats were full membership rather than provisional. Because they had read the Korath reports for 2 years and understood the mechanism of failure and built something different while following what looked, from outside, like the same path. Because they had looked at a rule designed to prevent catastrophe and understood it deeply enough to know exactly where it did and did not apply. Because they had decided that time was the scarcest resource in the calculation and acted accordingly, and had then arranged with careful patience to be caught. Because they operated by an internal logic that looked, from outside, like recklessness, and from inside had always been the only available option. Your request for full council membership is going to be supported, Vasselin said. I'll be recommending it in my report. I know, Dror said. You knew. We expected it after, she glanced over. Not before. If we'd expected it before, we would have waited and asked through proper channels. Vasselin considered that. Would you have, she asked, truly? Dror was quiet for a moment. She looked at the display, at the curving line, at the star outside the viewport, ordinary and calm and secretly capable of redirecting things that could swallow worlds. No, she said at last, honestly, probably not. The Council's official records listed the Thuresi deflection as a multi-species cooperative success. They listed the humans as a participating partner species, noted the provisional membership expansion, documented the reinterpretation of the prohibition, and filed it all under Emergency Stellar Defense Initiative *, which was a category that had been created specifically for this event, and would go on to be used 43 more times in the following century. Always by species who had looked at a problem that couldn't wait for consensus, and had made a decision that couldn't be sanctioned until after it worked. What the records did not show was Vasselin's final entry in her private arbitration journal. She wrote it the night of the deflection confirmation, alone in her quarters on Threshold Station, with the coffee smell still faintly in the corridors and the photograph of Dror's family still on the desk in the office down the hall. She wrote, "The Council has spent 40 years teaching species what happened to the Korath. The lesson we have taught is, do not exceed your knowledge. Do not move faster than your certainty. Do not act outside your sanctioned boundaries." The humans read the same lesson and learned, understand the mechanism of failure completely, then exceed everything else. They are not the most powerful species in this council. They are not the oldest, the most experienced, the most advanced, or the most credentialed. They do not have the largest fleet or the deepest history or the most votes. They are the species that read the prohibition, understood it better than the species who wrote it, and then built the thing anyway. Not out of arrogance, not out of defiance, out of a specific, careful, fully considered belief that the situation required it and they were the ones in the position to act. Every civilization eventually reaches the point where the rules cannot protect them. What varies is what they do at that moment. Most species wait for the rules to catch up. Humans decide the rules will catch up to them. I do not know if this will save them eventually or destroy them. I know that it saved us today. I know that they knew it would. I know that they were right. She closed the journal. Outside the viewport, Theresi's sun hung serene and orange-white in the dark. Its ordinary light carrying no sign of what it had been asked to do, what it had done, what it was still, quietly, capable of doing. Somewhere in the void, something ancient and vast was following new light toward silence. And in a converted mining station built inside an asteroid at the edge of human space, 260 people who had spent 26 months hiding what they were building finally